What started as a routine late-night interview exploded into television chaos when Harrison Ford confronted Jimmy Kimmel over inappropriate comments about his family, leading to an unprecedented on-air meltdown that ended with security escorting the legendary actor off-set. The atmosphere in Studio 6A felt different from the moment Harrison Ford walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live set. The 81-year-old Hollywood legend, promoting his latest project, carried himself with his trademark stoic demeanor, but seasoned crew members noticed something in his eyes, a simmering tension that hadn't been there during rehearsals. Kimmel, riding high on recent ratings success, seemed oblivious to the shift in energy as he launched into his opening monologue with his usual irreverent style. The audience laughed at his political jabs and celebrity gossip, but Ford sat rigidly in the guest chair, his jaw visibly clenched as the host wrapped up his routine. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Harrison Ford," Kimmel announced with exaggerated enthusiasm, gesturing toward his guest as the band struck up the familiar Indiana Jones theme. Ford offered a perfunctory wave to the cheering audience, but his handshake with Kimmel was notably brief and cold. The seasoned talk show host, however, pressed forward with his standard opening banter, seemingly unaware of his guest's mood. "Harrison, great to have you back on the show. You look fantastic for someone who's been dodging boulders and fighting Nazis for 4 decades, Kimmel quipped, drawing laughter from the audience. Ford's response was measured but lacked his usual dry humor. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy." The interview began routinely enough, with discussion about Ford's upcoming film and his experiences in Hollywood. But Kimmel, known for pushing boundaries with his celebrity guests, began steering the conversation toward more personal territory. "You know, Harrison, I've always admired how you've managed to keep your family life so private in this age of social media. Your wife Callista must have some serious restraint not to post every dinner you two have together," Kimmel said with a smirk. Ford's expression darkened slightly. "We value our privacy, yes." Sensing an opportunity for more provocative content, Kimmel leaned forward with that familiar mischievous grin that his regular viewers knew meant trouble was coming. "Speaking of family, I saw some paparazzi photos recently of you and Callista at your son Liam's college event. I have to say, for a guy who flies planes as a hobby, you sure looked terrified when Callista was driving that day." The audience chuckled, but Ford's knuckles whitened as he gripped his chair. "My family isn't here to be entertainment for your audience, Jimmy." Kimmel's grin widened, interpreting Ford's reaction as playful resistance rather than genuine anger. "Oh, come on, Harrison. Lighten up. I'm just saying, even Han Solo has to follow the speed limit when his wife's behind the wheel." The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken only by nervous laughter from a few audience members. Ford leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that the studio microphones barely caught. "I said my family isn't your material." But Kimmel, perhaps emboldened by the live audience and cameras, made a fatal miscalculation. "You know what? Maybe we should get Callista on the show. I bet she's got some great stories about living with Indiana Jones. Probably has to hide the whip collection from dinner guests." The color drained from Ford's face, and veteran crew members later described the moment as watching a bomb's timer hit 0. Ford stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that cut through the studio like a gunshot. The audience's laughter died instantly as the legendary actor towered over Kimmel, his hands trembling with barely contained rage. "You crossed a line," Ford said, his voice low and menacing. "You want to make jokes about me? Fine. But my wife is off-limits." Kimmel, still seated behind his desk, seemed to finally grasp the gravity of the situation, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "Harrison, come on, it's just a joke. This is a comedy show. People expect you to have some goddamn decency." Ford exploded, his voice echoing through the stunned studio. "You think because you're behind that desk, you can say whatever you want about people's families?" The audience sat in shocked silence, some fumbling for their phones to capture the unprecedented meltdown. Kimmel's writing staff exchanged panicked glances from the wings, while the director frantically gestured to his camera operators to keep rolling. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it," Kimmel stammered, finally understanding he'd pushed too far. "It's just comedy. Your wife is a lovely woman." "Don't," Ford cut him off, pointing a finger at the host. "Don't you dare try to smooth this. Over now. You made your choice when you decided to mock my family for cheap laughs." Kimmel attempted to regain control, forcing a nervous laugh. "Harrison, please sit down. We're live on television here." "Exactly," Ford shot back. "We're live on television, and you thought it was appropriate to humiliate my wife in front of millions of people. What kind of man does that?" The tension in the studio was suffocating. Band leader Cleto Escobedo Jr. had stopped playing entirely, his musicians frozen with their instruments half raised. The warm-up comedian who usually handled difficult moments was nowhere to be seen, leaving Kimmel to face Ford's wrath alone. "I think you're overreacting," Kimmel began, but Ford's bitter laugh cut him off. "Overreacting? You made sexual innuendos about my wife on national television, and I'm overreacting?" Ford's voice rose with each word. "You wouldn't say that garbage to my face in private, but you'll say it here because you think the cameras protect you." Kimmel's face flushed red as he realized his attempts at damage control were only making things worse. "Harrison, I think we should take a commercial break." "No," Ford snapped. "No commercial break. You wanted to entertain your audience? Let's entertain them. Tell them about your own marriage, Jimmy. Tell them about your own family. Let's see how you like having your personal life dragged through the mud for laughs." The host's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For once in his career, the man who made his living with words was completely speechless. Ford seized the moment, his anger reaching a boiling point that had been building for years of Hollywood fake pleasantries and media intrusion. "You people think celebrities are just puppets for your amusement," Ford continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades of frustration. "You think because we act in movies, our entire lives are fair game for your pathetic jokes." Security personnel had begun moving closer to the stage area, unsure whether to intervene in what was clearly an unprecedented situation. The show's producers were screaming into their headsets, torn between cutting to commercial and capturing what might be the most dramatic moment in late-night television history. Ford turned to address the audience directly, his legendary screen presence commanding the room despite the chaos. "You want to know what's really funny? This man makes millions of dollars pretending to be your friend every night, but he's too much of a coward to apologize when he crosses the line." The audience sat transfixed as Ford's words hung in the air like a challenge. Some viewers began pulling out their phones, instinctively knowing they were witnessing a career-defining moment that would be dissected across social media within minutes. Kimmel, his face now beet red with embarrassment and anger, finally found his voice. "You know what, Harrison? Maybe you should lighten up. This is comedy. If you can't handle a few jokes, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." The words were barely out of his mouth before Ford took a menacing step toward the desk. "A few jokes? You called my wife a control freak and made sexual references about our private life. That's not comedy. That's harassment." "Oh, please," Kimmel scoffed, his defensive mechanisms kicking in. "You Hollywood types are all the same. You love the spotlight until someone actually treats you like a real person instead of kissing your ass." Ford's eyes blazed with fury. "Real person? You wouldn't know a real person if they slapped you in the face. You hide behind that desk making cruel jokes about people's families because you're too pathetic to have a real conversation." The studio fell deadly silent except for the hum of cameras still rolling. Kimmel stood up now, matching Ford's aggressive posture. "You want a real conversation? Let's talk about how you've been coasting on the same three characters for 40 years. Han Solo, Indiana Jones, and Grumpy Old Man. Which one are you playing tonight?" Ford's laugh was cold and bitter. At least I created something people actually love. All you do is tear people down for cheap laughs. When's the last time you built anything, Jimmy? When's the last time you inspired anyone or made them feel better about themselves? I entertain millions of people every night, Kimmel shot back, his voice rising. You mock people every night, Ford corrected. There's a difference, and deep down, you know it. The confrontation had reached a fever pitch, with both men now standing and facing off like gladiators in an arena. The audience was completely silent, mesmerized by the raw emotion unfolding before them. Kimmel made one final desperate attempt to regain control. Security, I think Mr. Ford needs to be escorted out. He's clearly having some kind of episode. Ford's bitter laugh echoed through the studio. Episode? The only episode here is your pathetic attempt to humiliate me after I called you out for being a bully. Two security guards approached cautiously, unsure how to handle ejecting one of Hollywood's most beloved figures. Ford looked at them with disappointment rather than anger. Don't worry, gentlemen. I wouldn't stay in this toxic environment another second anyway. He turned back to Kimmel one final time. You know what the real tragedy is, Jimmy? You had a chance to apologize like a man, but instead you chose to double down on being cruel. That says everything about who you really are. Ford began walking toward the exit, his dignified stride commanding respect even in defeat. But he paused at the edge of the stage, turning back to address the stunned audience one last time. To everyone watching at home, remember this moment. This is what happens when someone with a platform chooses cruelty over kindness, when they mistake meanness for humor. You deserve better entertainment than watching someone's family get torn apart for laughs. The legendary actor disappeared through the exit doors, leaving behind a studio in complete chaos. Kimmel stood alone behind his desk, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment, while his crew scrambled to figure out how to salvage the remaining showtime. The audience began murmuring among themselves, many pulling out phones to immediately share what they'd witnessed. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media platforms, with overwhelming support pouring in for Ford and harsh criticism directed at Kimmel's behavior. The incident marked a turning point in late-night television, sparking conversations about the responsibility that comes with having a platform and the importance of treating guests with basic human decency. Ford's dignified exit had transformed what could have been a career-ending meltdown into a powerful statement about respect and professionalism in the entertainment industry, while Kimmel was left to face the consequences of crossing a line he should never have approached.